Welcome to episode 22 of the Brainstorm. Today we're talking Square, AI regulation, and SpaceX's Starlink. Andrew, is Jack back?
Jack is back. So Block reported third quarter earnings last week, beating on both top and bottom consensus. I thought it was the best call from them in recent memory. And the actual results and near-term guidance were, in my view, less important than Jack Dorsey's comments that reaffirmed, I think, significant investor confidence in Block as a potential winner in the U.S. digital wallet race.
Wait, so Andrew, before we get in, teeing up this, the last I heard was there was internal drama, right? This was before earnings, and I think there's a Bloomberg article saying, Cash App and more legacy Square were bumping heads. Was this resolved on that call?
Yeah, so I think the information did a deep dive on the multi-year conflict between Cash App and Square, namely just rivalry within Block overall, and that kind of has inhibited the company from, unlocking real product and cost synergies with direct collaboration between the two teams. And Dorsey explicitly acknowledged this during this past call, saying that, I understand that these two teams have been historically siloed, and what we're going to emphasize is, cross-team collaboration going forward, including an explicit kind of hint at some sort of deep commerce integration between Cash App and Square to be announced in early 2024.
All right. So then what else did we hear on the call?
So yeah, I mean, just as for context here, in October, we learned of Alyssa Henry, who was the CEO of Block's Square division. She departed after nearly 10 years at the company, and Jack Dorsey stepped into her role, becoming more involved in the day-to-day operations for Block's seller ecosystem initiatives. And he outlined explicitly a couple of things on the call. One, targeting reaching the Rule of 40 in 2026 with an initial composition of mid-teens gross profit growth and mid-teens operating margins, right? And I think there was less certainty on whether Dorsey was going to stay in this role for a long time before the call, but during the call, he committed to remaining the CEO of the Square division until Block reaches several milestones, including a significant return to growth, verbatim. And other than that, and the Cash App and Square hint, Dorsey was all over generative AI, talking about how AI is going to be key to kind of unlocking top-line growth acceleration while maintaining operating expense efficiency. And all of these, commitments were music to investors' ears, I think. But for me, I think that particular point on that collaboration between Cash App and Square is really interesting because it kind of resonates so much with our last big ideas digital wallet thesis, right? We outlined specifically how people can use Cash App as a primary bank account and hold, meaningful deposits on the platform, and Block could directly debit consumer Cash App balances and transfer them to, say, Square merchants accounts, right? With any debit transaction occurring between Cash App customers and Square customers, and bypass legacy issuers and card networks in the process, right? Potentially
Andrew,
their net take rates.
Maybe I can pull you out here for a second.
Sure.
ELI 5 here. What's the thesis on mobile digital wallets?
Well, I think the thesis here is that value accrual will, I think vertical software plays that can sell digital wallets to both consumer and merchant ecosystems are in a great position to capture the most value in a payment value chain.
All right. And so that's
the LI5.
And so then it sounds like, these are all just steps along the way to making that the reality.
Yeah, I mean, like having access to the millions of Square merchants in the US within your Cash App, right, is a really, really powerful discovery channel, right? And if customers are directly transacting with these merchants in Cash App without going through like separate checking accounts or separate like credit cards or debit cards, then it positions Square really Block really well to power a closed loop payment ecosystem, right? Saving a lot of costs along the way.
And so, in your mind, what's kind of the failure mechanism here? Obviously they can come in and they can make guidance. Dorsey can come in. Jack is back. Fireworks off in the background. What's kind of the risk here, and what you're watching to see that they stay on track in realizing this goal?
Sure. I mean, first step is to acknowledge the problem, right? Which Dorsey has done. I think second step is for us to actually see collaboration, right, between Cash App and Square. And I think it's much more of a show me story going forward now that we explicitly understand that management has acknowledged at least the multi-year kind of issue brewing at the company. And I'm very excited for Q1, Q2 of next year to hopefully see something in action and hopefully see consumers rapidly adopt whatever Block has implemented in terms of bringing more Square merchants explicitly onto the Cash App surface.
Great. Let's jump on. I know, Andrew, you spent a lot of time now looking at regulation, and there's the executive order from Biden, and maybe I'll just read the headline there. Right, you can look on the fact sheet. President Biden issues executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy artificial intelligence. Is this similar to the early regulation of cars on roads, and we're going to have someone walking in front with a red flag saying, watch out, there's a car here. We don't want to scare any horses. Or is this necessary as part of the development of these super powerful AI agents?
Yeah, so more specifically on the executive order, what we understand as of now is that foundation model developers will have to adhere to some reporting testing requirements and for new models to undergo certain tests right before they are commercially released. And we don't really know what these guidelines are, right, because they are to be developed over the course of the next 3 to 9 months. And I guess we will see in action like how draconian these compliance requirements will be, but it seems like the covert goals of already established and well-funded, commercial foundation model platforms are coming to fruition, right? Like how will startups challenge incumbent foundation models without relying on their base models, basically, if they are going to be subject to like really robust compliance requirements that they might not be able to afford at all, right? And I think there are parallels to be made to like the monopoly that AT&T operated right within residential, business, and long distance telephone services for 60 years, right, before its breakup in the early 80s, right? And like even by the early 1900s, I think the general public and the government understood how powerful it was, right? With over, I think, 50% telephone market share at the time. And the evolution of, Alexander Bell's Bell Telephone Company and later AT&T all hinged on, extremely aggressive patent infringement lawsuits since inception, inhibiting any competition from reaching scale as AT&T, continued to acquire assets and raise barriers to entry. And the government seemed to have very little problem with this, as seen in a 1921 act called the Willis-Graham Act, right, which waived telephone exchange mergers from antitrust scrutiny if regulators approved the buyout, right? And by 1932, AT&T controlled like 80% of telephones and had the only long-distance network in the U.S.
Yeah, and I feel like this is an interesting wrinkle in the narrative that was forming, because already, right, you had this huge wave. Everyone's, oh my God, these models, they're going to be, amazing. They're going to capture tons of value. And then I would say probably within the last 4 months, the narrative has been actually it's a race to zero. These are all going to be commoditized. Meta out there open sourcing Llama 2. You've got Grok coming out. And now this, as you're saying, this type of regulation could be overbearing enough such that maybe there is value capture for the existing players. Is that the right way to think about it?
Yeah, and I think there's something kind of eerily similar with the foundation models narratives today, and again with AT&T, right? As in, like AT&T achieved their spree of acquisitions and regulatory complacency alongside this like consistent marketing campaign of treating telco as like a quasi public good, right? With AT&T aiming to offer this like universal service to the company, and maybe this is a stretch a little bit here, but like, I mean, obviously there's a lot of upfront costs to train larger and more performant models, right? And OpenAI's kind of like publicly voiced concerns around AI safety and the need for regulation and like AGI as a human right and universal human tool and universal basic income, like all of these things kind of feel eerily reminiscent of early days telco. And I think US regulators kind of have to get it right now, right? In that like Benchmark's Bill Gurley talked about regulatory capture with the Telecom Act in 1996, right? Recently, I think like 2 months ago, he talked about this, which it was an act that was aimed to increase competition after like nearly a century, right, of monopoly or very high market concentration in the vertical. And all it ended up doing was benefiting incumbents and their subsequent M&A sprees, propping up lobbying budgets and making the space uninvestable for venture capitalists. So even if like this current wave of AI regulation ends up in further market concentration among the open AIs of the world, like a future regulation that tries to revert that could end up exacerbating the process too. So very interesting times here. Unsure what's going to happen, but we always have to thank, I guess, regulation for keeping things more interesting than they have to be, right?
Right. So then maybe I'll just try and frame takeaways here. Tell me if I'm hitting them or I'm missing. One, definitely a wrinkle to the story. The thing to be cautious about is this overburdensome that's going to stifle competition and lead to regulatory capture for incumbents. And then the second point, I think I'll just throw out kind of our existing thesis here, and I think it applies with or without regulation, which is that a unique data set and unique distribution are what's going to lead to high value AI networks.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. There's a question of like how much value kind of resides at the foundation model layer if regulatory capture kind of ensues, right? Meaning that there may be like less value to be captured at the application layer or at the layer that like houses unique, say, proprietary data. But I think your broader point of, like consumers, not consumers, but like people at the end of the day are going to be interacting with some sort of abstracted interface, right? And that has historically meant applications. That could also mean like new AI models that kind of sit at the in the middle between like people and the foundation models provided by, say, OpenAI and Anthropic and the like. But I would generally agree with everything you've said, except for I think it's like unclear now with regulation how overall revenue will be shared among market participants.
And that's what makes it interesting. That's why we brainstorm.
That's why we brainstorm.
All right. Last topic of the day, and one that I think is particularly exciting, is SpaceX Starlink. There's a tweet from Elon Musk last week. Excited to announce that at SpaceX at Starlink has achieved break-even cash flow. Excellent work by a great team. That's pretty incredible for a number of reasons. One, I'll start from just the business aspect in history here. Most satellite constellations that have ever been launched as a business have gone bankrupt. And I think, there's a lot of reasons why that's happened. But one of them is there's a huge amount of capital And then there's this huge valley of death that is the time between investing all of this money, putting those satellites up into space, and then acquiring all the customers to actually increase utilization of that network. So, maybe you can't actually start getting customers on the platform until you have a certain number of satellites up. And so that's a huge amount of cost. And then if there's enough time between you getting customers and when you got to pay the bills, that leads to the collapse. So having a, you know, default alive satellite constellation where they can self-fund is definitely remarkable in the history of space. A huge part of that is reusable rockets and the amazing work from SpaceX there. And then I think the other side of this that people are speculating on is that in the past, Elon has said that when there are predictable cash flows for Starlink, they would consider spinning it out. And so everyone's always excited by that prospect. I think it's still early. Reaching break even and having predictable cash flows don't necessarily come right on top of each other, but this is a huge mark in time for the future of internet connection and Starlink.
So when will we get free Wi-Fi on all flights, Sam?
Free Wi-Fi on all flights. I don't think it'll ever be free. I think it'll probably get bundled into your ticket price and you'll be paying for it, but you'll say it's free. And I think that is coming in the next, I'll say 5 years. The problem is with airlines, it's tough for them to make these big acquisitions and then deploy it across their fleet. But we've seen some airlines partner with SpaceX. Others have partnered with other providers. I think the reality is that, this is already a fact for cruise ships. It seems like the cruise ships are jumping onto Starlink far faster than the airlines. So, Andrew, you got to go take a cruise, play some League of Legends or some games, see how the internet works out.
All right, sounds good.
There you have it. Thank you for joining us for episode 22, and we will see you next week.